Hello everybody, welcome on in here to our user group webinar. My name is Jim. I'm coming to you live on a sunny and cool day here in Columbus, Ohio. Welcome on in. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Today's webinar, we're going to be covering working with the grid in the membership module in version 20 of Church Windows. So version 20 of our program has not yet been released. We are polishing up the final touches on it. Because of that, the version I will be demonstrating here today is not the final version of that program. So there's a couple of things that might be slightly different, but for the most part, this is awfully close to the finished product we'll be working with here today. So the membership module in version 20 is the main focus, the primary focus of this update. So many of the things in that module are going to be different, and that includes today's topic, which is that find grid. So we'll cover working with that grid a bit in our webinar here today. Before we get started on that, though, a quick word on your GoToWebinar control panel that y'all have on your screen right now. You have a small red arrow button in the upper left-hand corner, usually of that GoToWebinar control panel, that allows you to either minimize that to allow you to see a little bit more of the screen and what we're going to be working in here today. And maximizing that gives you access to the features of that control panel, which include the questions section. So as I go through our presentation here today, which should go about 20 minutes or so, possibly a little bit shorter based on the topic here today, I may not have time to answer questions during that, but at the end here I'll leave the room open, and you'll be able to type in any questions on that topic. So if we can please leave the questions to the topic at hand, which is working with that fine grid, that would be awesome. All of that being said, let's go ahead and start taking a... Sorry, one last thing. I'll be working from one of our regional training workbooks, which we have for sale on our website. The version 20 of those workbooks should be available already right now for purchase. So if you have any of those, we'll be working from the Membership 102 book. We'll be going from pages 13 to page 20. And that's the material that I'm using for our presentation here today. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look here. I'm going to open up our membership module. This is what membership is going to look like in version 20 of Church Windows. And the grid is a function that you gain access to from the people screen. So I'm going to go ahead and click on people and open up to that. So this is the people window in version 20 of Church Windows, version 20 here. This particular screen here, if you're doing a search for an individual person, that is done using this person lookup drop-down search box right up here. So if you have one particular person you're looking for, I have as you type in the names here, you'll see a drop-down list. You can find an individual name right here on that drop-down list there. So you can either click on the down arrow or you can type in somebody's name on there. You can also search for a group of people using the Find button, which is here in the upper left-hand corner of the screen right there. And clicking on that button takes you to a criteria window here where you type in the criteria for the folks that you're looking for. If you simply want to generate a grid, from here you could do a search based on any particular criteria that you track in membership, whether it be membership status or birth dates or anything along those lines. If you leave that blank and simply click your Find button, it's going to generate a grid screen for all of the folks in your people section here, all the folks in membership that do not that have not been marked as inactive. Unlike prior versions of Church Windows, this particular grid includes folks from either category, the members category or the visitors category, or any other categories that you may set up in the system here. It is a key difference from the way things used to be, where we would have to generate multiple grids to get folks from various categories. It's all rolled together right here on this one grid. From this grid, you can make edits on here. This can be a data entry tool. You can customize this screen to display in any way that you see fit, change the formats of it. You can print reports based on the information here on this grid as well. The other thing I would point out when it comes to customizing this grid screen is that any changes that you make are stored separately by password in the Church Windows program. So if you have multiple passwords set up for Church Windows and different people work in the membership module, everybody has their own personal customized view of this grid. So any changes that they make on here is for their version of the grid only. Okay. So the first thing we want to talk about is when you come to this grid, it is very easy to toggle back and forth between this find grid and then individual records back on your people screen. So as you can scroll using the scroll bar over here on the right side of the screen here, and if there is an particular record you want to take a look at, here's Sean Lee's record right here. You can select that line on your grid by clicking on the little checkbox over here on the far left of the screen to indicate that that person has been selected. You'll see that line light up in blue when you do so. If you want to flip directly to that person's record over in the People window, you can use this button up here at the top, this Go to Record button up here at the top to go right to their record. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So it flips you right over to that person's record. So here's Sean Lee's record over in the membership, or in the membership People screen. Now, you can flip back to the grid that you were just working on by clicking on this grid button, which is now active. It was not active when we first opened the People window, but it is now that we have generated a grid. So what that means is if you did a particular search, when you clicked your Find button, this grid contains the same folks from that last search. In this case, I didn't do any criteria, so it's just everybody on the People screen without that haven't been marked as inactive. So clicking here, it regenerates that grid, and now you see all the same folks that you were looking at just a moment ago. So this allows you to flip back and forth between the People window and the grid screen right here. Okay, so some of the other things you can do on here. What I did a moment ago was I tagged an individual's record by clicking on the checkbox on the left side. Anybody who is selected on this grid are going to be the records that will be reported on if you used the either the print grid button up here at the top or the reports button up here. So in this case, I have tagged that one individual record. I could come through here and I can tag several folks on here just by clicking on them. And then I can print a report based on only the folks here on this grid. So if I come here to reports, for example, I can do an email report, I can print labels for these folks, or I can do regular reports on here. These are the same reports windows that you see in other parts of the membership module. I can run a basic columnar report. If I click my print button here, it'll only be the folks that I have tagged back there on the grid. And in this case, that's not been completed here in this version of version 20 here. But you'd click your print button and it'll print those folks there. Again, this is not the finalized version of version 20, so there's a couple of things that haven't quite been ironed out in this version. The other thing you can do in terms of tagging records on this grid, there is also sort of a checkbox at the top of the screen, this little checkbox right up here on the very top line that will basically check everybody on the grid. You would use this, and you see how it highlights everyone. You would use this if you want to do practically everyone on here, but there's just a couple of folks you don't want. This will allow you to come through here and deselect a couple of folks. And then you could print your reports or print your grid from those settings right there. So that is the way to select records on the grid here. Next bit on this topic is to control which fields and the order in which those fields appear here on the grid. So the way we're seeing this right here, where it is starting with the mailing label field for the households. We've got our address 1, address 2, etc. on here in this order, is just one of the ways that we can display this grid. You may have noticed when we're looking at this grid, it is difficult to know whose records we're looking at, because you'll see here's Mr. and Mrs. Jake Knox. There's 4 different people in that household, but we don't know their individual names because of the way we've got this grid organized right here. I could always use my scroll bar here down at the bottom of the screen and scroll over to the right here until I find their names, which are, where are they here? Way over here. So here's our last name. Man, this is nickname. So it's kind of in a messy order here. If I wanted to have my first name and last name be the first thing I see on this grid, just as an example, I can come to the columns and sorting button right up here in the upper left-hand corner of our Find Grid screen. So if I click here, it takes us to our Find Grid options window. There's 2 tabs on here. The first one is columns. So if I wanted to change the order here, by the way, it's got 2 sections on here. There are the visible columns. These are all of the columns that are currently appearing on our grid when we're looking at that. Over here on the left side are all of the potential columns we could show on our grid if we wanted to. So let's start by changing the order here the way I was talking about here. Let's say I wanted first name and last name to be the first 2 fields I display on here. Over here on the right side under visible columns, I can select my first name field. There are a couple of arrow buttons, order buttons over here on the right side of that I can use, either the up arrow or the down arrow, to move that field up or down on my list. So if I click on my up arrow, I can move the first name so that it is the very first field that we see on our grid. Last name is in a weird order here. Where is it? There it is, way down here. So I'm going to select last name, and I'm going to move all this up. So you just kind of click it, and it moves up our list. I'm going to put it right here underneath first name. When I click OK on here, it's going to regenerate the grid. Now I see the individual people. So we see now this is Jake Knox, this is Sarah Knox, this is Nate Knox. Now you know who the individuals are in that household there. Also, if there are fields that you're not currently displaying on this grid, but you want to, you can do that on this columns tab as well. There are various fields that you can get to in here. A series of address fields. You can, in version 20 of Church Windows, you can store multiple addresses for a particular household. So if it's you know, if you got some rich folks in your congregation that have a couple of different houses or whatever, summer houses and things along those lines, you can track multiple alternate addresses for each household at this point. So that's what all of this alternate address 1, alternate address 2, and all of that stuff is up here. You've also got the contact fields right here. Let's say, notice we don't have cell phone on our grid right now. Let's say that we want that to be one of the first fields we see on here. So I can select cell phone. I can click on, in this case, you're going to use the arrow buttons in the middle that point to the left or the right. See these right in here. So if you click on the arrow button pointing to the right, what you're doing is you're taking a field from the available column side and putting it onto your grid under visible column. So I'm going to select cell phone. I'm going to click on my arrow button pointing to the right, and it's going to put that cell phone field down here at the bottom of the screen. If I wanted to move that up so that it's one of the very first fields on my grid, I can again use my little arrow button here and move that all the way up here. It takes a while because I've got probably way too darn many fields on my grid here. But I'm going to put that right here so that it's after last name. When I click OK, it rebuilds my grid, and it's now including that field. Okay. There's two different ways to sort this grid. You can sort it sort of on a temporary basis by simply clicking on the column header on this screen. So if I wanted everybody grouped by their city on here, you'll see the city family main box right up here. So this box right here. All I do is I point my mouse at that box at the top and I click, and it resorts my entire grid sorted by that field. So all the folks in the same cities are now grouped together. Okay, this is and by the way, when you sort by a particular field, it'll group all of the blanks together. So that is a good trick to find records that don't have particular things filled in for it. Okay, you'll note what field you're sorting by because you'll see a tiny little arrow button, as you see right there. That little arrow button right there in that city box. You'll notice. So if I then wanted to again sort by alphabetical order by last name, I can come over here, I can click in last name. You'll now see that little arrow button there. Now it is sorted in that way. This temporary sort changes if you were to close out of Church Windows and come back in. It doesn't save that on a permanent basis. If you want this to be a more permanent sort, so that every time you come back and generate your grid, you do that on your columns and sorting button here. The tabs along the top, we've been looking at the columns tab, but you can also come to the group and sort tab, and you can change the way this sorts if you choose to on here. So for example, I've got a big project I'm going to be working on where I'm going to be working with birth dates in the system here. And I need to clean up our birth date field. I can kind of set that so that over the next couple of times I come into Church Windows, when I generate the grid, it's going to sort it by birth date. So that's sort field 1. Within there, if let's say you have multiple people with the same birthday, that's what sort field 2 is for. So if people have the same birthday, I want that sorted by last name within that particular field. Oop, come on. So that's what sort field 1 and sort field 2 does. Okay. When I click OK, it's going to be sorted in that way. Let me actually move my birth date field up so I can actually see it on my grid. Of course, it's down here towards the bottom. Let me move that up. Right there. Okay. So again, you'll notice that it sorts all the blanks at the top here, which takes me to the next thing I wanted to make sure I talked about. The last thing in our presentation here is that you can do data entry right here on this screen. So this is a window that allows you to, instead of going record to record on the people screen where you're just kind of searching for records one at a time, you can actually do data entry right on here. So for example, let's say you published like some kind of questionnaire to your membership so that you can update their records in the system. And you have a whole bunch of these things and you can do a bunch of data entry all at one particular time. You can just click in these boxes here and do data entry right here from this screen. February 17th, 1970. And it sorts it. Now, that disappeared because it's sorted. It's sorting in birth date order. So there's Stephanie Welch's record that I just edited there. So it's sorting that way, so it's kind of taking it off the list. But basically, you can do data entry right here on this window. Anything that you wish to change, you can right here on this screen. So like, for example, if I come here to Donna Bell, January 1st, 1985. Oops. Save that on here. Just hitting the, clicking off of that field kind of saves it. If I close out of this screen and I go find Donna's record, and we find that birth date field right there, that's an easy way to go from record to record to record very quickly and make data entry for them. Okay, so that is all the time I have, and that's all of the topic I wanted to cover. Generating the grid on the people window, working with that grid on that screen as well. So these are just some of the things you're going to be keeping an eye open for when version 20 gets released before the end of this year. Thank you for joining me, everybody. I hope if you're all set to get on with your day, feel free to click on the X in the upper right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar control panel. That'll exit you out of the room here. So thanks for joining me. Anybody who wants to hang around, if you have any specific questions about that grid, feel free to type them in now. I will leave the room open for a bit for folks with questions.